Back in 2015 we had a total of 9 supercars. Nowadays this total has gone up all the way to 48, 45 of them being usable inside of races. The top 3 supercars were pretty close together and all offered a different driving experience. There wasn't really a clear winner, and if there was, the differences weren't very big. And then the Gtamen DLCs rolled around. There were 2 parts of this DLC released about a month apart from each other. In part 1 the Osiris was released, and in part 2 the T20 was released. And of course the Osiris took the top spot right away, but not really by much. It was a car that from my experience was pretty heavy on the traction and the acceleration that it had, which is what had made it so good around the track. Till this day the Osiris really is a great car to drive, and compared to the Centorno, which was the top dog back then, it wasn't too far behind it either, and it really became a battle of which car you preferred. But generally speaking, the Osiris was much easier to drive than the Centorno because, well, it can be a little wild at times. It was a pretty great time in terms of the supercar class and its balance, but Gtamen Part 1 also was the very first time that we saw a raceable vehicle get very close to the $2 million mark. The T20 in the Gtamen Part 2 DLC would finally break this $2 million mark for the very first time. We all came fresh off the Heists DLC, and personally I had done the Colonel Mastermind challenge, so it wasn't really that big of a deal to me. But back then you would earn like about $400,000 per heist, which you had to do with 3 other people, so yeah, it was a pretty big deal back then to see a car that expensive for its time. And then came the T20. About a month after the Osiris took the top spot, the T20 came around costing a cool $2.2 million. And you guessed it, it took the top spot in the Supers class right away. And this thing was quick. And it was also the very first time we had an active spoiler in the game. Prior to the T20, we didn't really have this type of tech in our car. The active spoiler would primarily work when you were at speed, but during slow speed corners, you wouldn't really benefit from it too much. Whereas with the Osiris, you had the spoiler at all time. The T20 also had a slightly higher top speed, so what ended up happening is that the T20 did become the go-to car for tracks around the Vinewood Hills area. And the Osiris was more for those races with those really slow speed corners. But in most scenarios, the T20 would still outperform the Osiris. It was a really interesting time for the supercars class back then. I would even argue that it was probably the most balanced we ever had inside of the class too, which obviously isn't that hard considering there were only 11 cars. Oh yeah, and did I mention that the PS3 and the Xbox 360 versions of GTA Online still have a T20 with an active spoiler that actually doesn't work? Poor bastards. Personally, I always drove the T20 because, you know, it's the fastest, I only gotta drive the top supercar, But when I decided to give the Osiris a try, I ended up loving it and actually using it instead of the T20 in races. The Osiris really is one of those cars that doesn't seem to lose traction, at least not very easily. And for the simple fact that downforce didn't exist back then, it was quite remarkable to see a car go around those corners that easily. Until they did forget to balance the RE7B and practically made it an F1 car, but hey, you know, that's in the future. But those are just some of my thoughts. Of course, I'd love to know what you think down in the comment section down below. Did you ever own either of the two? Have you driven them? And what do you think about them? Let me know all your thoughts in those comments down below. But with all that said and with all that done, that was it for this one. Thank you all so very much for watching. Leave a like if you enjoyed, subscribe for more, and if you really like what you see on the channel, consider becoming a member, like Chloe, the Crazy Brit, Robert, and Dr. Strange Love. Join them by clicking the join button down below. Thank you again for watching, and I'll see you all later.